Let's step back and get some perspective. We're looking for a girl who is fleeing from a marriage they have made for her. But this is A Song of Ice and Fire, and just about every girl is fleeing from a marriage. So that doesn't really help. We're also looking for a girl who passed to the eastern side of the lake. It can't be an ocean because the water is described as still and freezing. It has to be a big lake because Melisandre said it seemed to go on and on forever. And besides Long Lake, the only other big lake in Westeros is way down south in the Riverlands. The God's Eye. The descriptions of God's Eye come out of Arya's chapters. When she glimpsed the lake ahead, between houses and trees, Arya put her knees into her horse, galloping past Wath and Gendry. She burst out onto the grassy sward beside the pebbled shore. The setting sun made the tranquil surface of the water shimmer like a sheet of beaten copper. It was the biggest lake she had ever seen, with no hint of a far shore. To the east, God's Eye was a sheet of sun-hammered blue that filled half the world. Some days, as they made their slow way up the muddy shore, Gendry wanted no part of any roads, and even Hot Pie and Lommy saw the sense in that. Arya felt as though the lake were calling her. She wanted to leap into those placid blue waters, to feel clean again, to swim and splash and bask in the sun. A raft, suggested Gendry. Anyone can build a raft, and long poles for pushing. Yoren looked thoughtful. Lake's too deep to pole across. Whoa. These are perfect. The water and landscape have exact and synonymous descriptions as the vision. Tranquil is still. A grassy sward is a field. It filled half the world, and it seems to go on forever. We don't have to assume that the water is blue and still, because the author shows it to us, right in the story. This is a really strong lead for Arya as the girl in grey. But we've already run into a big problem. The vision says the water is supposed to be west of the girl, but Arya thinks here that is to the east. As I'm sure you know, every chapter in A Song of Ice and Fire is written from the point of view of one person. Everything presented to us is presented in the way that character perceives it, with all their biases and misunderstandings intact. It's called unreliable narration, and it's a wonderfully convenient way for the author to hide clues in plain sight, while still playing fair. In order for us to find out the full picture of what's really going on, sometimes we have to cross-reference information from one chapter with information from another chapter, or another point of view character. Now, Arya is a 10-year-old kid. I don't know about you, but it took me most of my childhood to get a handle on the difference between East and West. So it's possible that Arya is mistaking East and West. Let's reread the first few chapters of A Clash of Kings, and trace her journey to find out exactly which side of this lake she's on. After Ned Stark's execution, Yoren snatches up Arya and sneaks her out of the city with the rest of the Night's Watch recruits. They travel up the Kingsroad, and Hot Pie and Lommy are giving her crap. Arya beats him up, real bad, and Yoren gives her a spanking. One of them Old Testament spankings, like, pull down your pants, she can't sit in her saddle for a few days. To be fair, she almost killed Hot Pie. Yoren reiterates the plan to her. He's like, look, you need to stay low, because I'm just trying to get you to Winterfell safely. And Arya thinks this. But it was Jon Snow she thought of most. She wished somehow they could come to the Wall before Winterfell, so Jon might muss up her hair and call her little sister. She'd tell him, I missed you, and he'd say it too at the very same moment, the way they always used to say things together. She would have liked that. She would have liked that better than anything. So that's kind of like she's racing to Jon for protection. They were stopped by a group of gold cloaks, who were sent by Queen Cersei to retrieve Gendry. Cersei is on a Baratheon killing spree right now, because she doesn't want to risk any of King Robert's bastards threatening her family's claim to the throne. You know what that means. The stag symbolism is back. Gendry has Baratheon blood, even though he doesn't know it. So he can be Arya's a deer once. The group cuts a hard left onto a winding trail. They travel up the river for a bit, and this is where we have to pay attention, because they stop, and Yoren is trying to figure out which way they should go. It was midday when the others returned. Wath reported a wooden bridge half a mile downstream, but someone had burned it up. Yoren peeled a sour leaf off the bale.
Might be we could swim the horses over, maybe the donkeys, but there's no way we'll get those wagons across. And there's smoke to the north and west. More fires. Could be this side of the river's the place we want to be.
He picked up a long stick and drew a circle in the mud, a line trailing down from it.
That's God's Eye, with the river flowing south. We're here.
He poked a hole beside the line of the river, under the circle.
We can't go around west of the lake like I thought. East takes us back to the Kingsroad.
He moved the stick up to where the line and circle met.
Near as I recall, there's a town here. The Holdfast's stone, and there's a lordling got his seat there too. Just a tower house, but he'll have a guard, might be a night or two. We'll follow the river north. Should be there before dark. They'll have boats, so I mean to sell all we got and hire us one.
He drew the stick up through the circle of the lake, from bottom to top.
Gods be good, we'll find a wind and a sail across the God's Eye to Harrenhal.
So they couldn't cross the bridge because it was burned. They couldn't swim across because they have wagons, and Yoren didn't want to cross anyway because there were fires over there. When they got to the Holdfast, they found that it was abandoned, and they spent the night. A group of king's men arrived and demanded entrance. Yoren refused, and a battle broke out. Arya, Gendry, Hot Pie, and Weasel escaped safely, and returned the next day. But everyone was dead. They came to a deserted village, got captured by the Mountains men, and taken to Harrenhal. So it's settled. Arya traveled up the eastern shore of God's Eye, placing the water west of her, just like in Melisandre's vision. Wow. This whole scavenger hunt was because a kid mixed up her east and west. Let's not get carried away. We still have a lot of blanks to fill in for Arya, if she's the girl in grey. For starters, the water doesn't have a thin coat of ice just forming on it. Arya wasn't riding a dying horse, either. What marriage is she fleeing from? How about the Red Wedding? The Hound took her there, and they had to flee from it. But the Red Wedding wasn't made for her. In fact, most people thought Arya was dead. And besides, the Red Wedding didn't happen until much later. So she couldn't have been fleeing from the Red Wedding when she traveled past God's Eye. Does it matter if the different elements of the vision didn't happen at the same time? I want to talk about riddles. Take this one for example. What always runs but never walks, often murmurs but never talks, has a bed but never sleeps, has a mouth but never eats. So this is clearly a river. But look at what it does. It frames the question in a way that suggests that it's describing a person. Running, walking, murmuring, talking, sleeping, eating. These are all things people do. But I know from the word what that it isn't a people. It's a thing. And what kind of things do people things? Animals. So I begin searching the entire animal kingdom for animals that murmur or have a bed. And that search can keep me occupied for days. But I'll never find the right answer that way, because a river isn't an animal. What if instead I said, this riddle is clearly directing me towards animals, so it's probably not an animal. So where is our riddle clearly directing us? How is it framed from the beginning? Melisandre returned to her fire to find the when and where for Jon, which carries the implication that there is a single when and where. Mance Rayder rode south to search for the Grey Girl, literally. Everything about the framing seems to steer us and the characters towards a literal interpretation of the vision. I've been searching for one girl's story to converge onto the characteristics of the vision, but maybe what I should be looking for is for the characteristics of the vision to occur over one girl's story.
There was another marriage in Arya's story. In A Game of Thrones, Robb Stark and his army arrived at the Twins, the castle of House Frey that guards the only bridge over an enormous river. Catelyn had a meeting with Lord Walder Frey to request passage over the bridge for Robb's army. Walder, however, is a cautious man, and we can see that he still hasn't really chosen a side in the war. He needs some convincing. A lot of convincing. In exchange for passage, Catelyn agreed that she will foster 2 of Walder Frey's grandsons at Winterfell. Robb will take Walder's son Oliver as his personal squire. Robb will marry one of Walder's daughters, and Arya will marry Walder's youngest son, Elmar Frey. That's a marriage they have made for her. The problem is, Arya isn't really fleeing from it. I don't even think she knows about it. But Arya actually met Elmar Frey at Harrenhal. They were friends for a little while, but they had an argument or something. Wait a minute. How did that argument end? You do it. Elmar could be friendly when he needed help, but afterward he would always remember that he was a squire, and she was only a serving girl. He liked to boast how he was the son of the Lord of the Crossing, not a nephew or a bastard or a grandson, but a true-born son, and on account of that, he was going to marry a princess. Arya didn't care about his precious princess, and didn't like him giving her commands. I have to bring my lord water for his basin. He's in his bedchamber being leeched. Not the regular black leeches, but the big pale ones. Elmar's eyes got as big as boiled eggs. Leeches terrified him, especially the big pale ones that looked like jelly until they filled up with blood.
I forgot. You're too skinny to push such a heavy barrel. I forgot. You're stupid.
Arya picked up the pail.
Maybe you should get leeched too. There's leeches in the neck as big as pigs.
She left him there with his barrel. I think Arya might be part wildling because that was savage. Elmar's always bragging that he's going to marry a princess. Arya's sick and tired of hearing about his princess, and neither of them realize that Arya is the princess he's supposed to marry. Elmar doesn't even know she's Arya. He thinks she's a serving girl named Nan. The next and last time they ever saw each other, they were discussing their marriage again. Elmar was sitting on the steps outside, alone. "What's wrong?" Arya asked him when she saw the tears shining on his cheeks.
"My princess," he sobbed. "We've been dishonored," Aenys says. "There was a bird from the twins. My lord father says I'll need to marry someone else or be a septon."
A stupid princess, she thought. That's nothing to cry over. "My brothers might be dead," she confided. Elmar gave her a scornful look.
"No one cares about a servant girl's brothers."
It was hard not to hit him when he said that.
"I hope your princess dies," she said,
and ran off before he could grab her.
She ran off, fleeing from this marriage they have made for her. At Harrenhal, Arya is assigned to work in the kitchens, which is a pretty good deal as far as being a servant goes. But Arya is basically royalty, and she doesn't recognize the opportunity here. She runs her mouth, gets into trouble, and she's assigned to serve a vicious man named Whis, and they give her a shift of grey rough-spun wool. Look at that. It's the grey servant clothes again.
That could make her a girl in grey. But we could probably make a list of 100 characters who wear grey at some point in the story. As cool as it feels to find Arya's grey clothes, it doesn't feel satisfying enough as the answer to the girl in grey. Much like Gendry with his deer symbolism, I'm hoping to find greyness that is tricky and uniquely relevant to Arya's story. Arya escaped Harrenhal with Gendry and Hot Pie, and some stolen horses. Oh boy, we have a horse now, although it doesn't seem to be a dying horse. But if we keep a close eye on the horse as Arya journeys throughout the Riverlands,
Maybe we'll see a way in which the horse can be interpreted as a dying horse. The brave companions, also known as the Bloody Mummers, were sent to hunt Arya down. When they crossed the first stream, Arya turned her horse aside and led them off the road, following the twisting course of the water for a quarter-mile, before finally scrambling out and up a stony bank. If the hunters brought dogs, that might throw them off the scent, she hoped. When she can, she rides along the bed of little streams to throw hunters off her trail. That day, Arya quickened their pace, keeping the horses to a trot as long as she dared, and sometimes spurring to a gallop when she spied a flat stretch of field before them. That was seldom enough, though. The ground was growing hillier as they went. The hills were not high, nor especially steep, but there seemed to be no end of them, and they soon grew tired of climbing up one and down the other, and found themselves following the lay of the land, along stream beds and through a maze of shallow wooded valleys, where the trees made a solid canopy overhead. That passage was loaded with the prophecy. As the chapter comes to an end, Arya goes to sleep and she has a wolf dream. Arya does this a few times throughout the books, but it isn't until later that she starts to realize that they're more than dreams. She's a sleepwalker. Through her direwolf Nymeria, she kills the bloody mummers that are chasing her. Alright, it's time for some direwolf trivia. What color is Arya's direwolf, Nymeria? We need to find Arya's dying horse that she's supposed to be riding. Back at the Kingsroad, she was riding a donkey. She stole a horse from Harrenhal, and then the Brotherhood Without Banners tried to buy it from her with a paper promise. It's little better than theft in my opinion, but that's okay, because they stole Arya too. So Arya got to ride her horse for about 6 more chapters. It's a particularly good horse because it came from Roose Bolton's own stables. But it doesn't look like the horse will be dying anytime soon. Which is great for the horse, but not for us. Arya had a conversation with a polite boy in the Brotherhood Without Banners named Edric Dane, and she thought about going to the Wall again to meet Jon. He's with the Night's Watch on the Wall. Maybe I should go to the Wall instead of River Run. Jon wouldn't care who I killed, or whether I brushed my hair. Jon looks like me, even though he's bastard-born. He used to muss my hair and call me little sister. Arya missed Jon most of all. Just saying his name made her sad. The Brotherhood captured the Hound, gave him a trial by battle, and he won. But they wouldn't give him his gold back. So he kidnapped Arya and he planned to ransom her at the Twins. There's no way across, she thought. Lord Beric will catch us for sure. Clegane had pushed his big black stallion hard, doubling back thrice to throw off pursuit, once even riding half a mile up the center of a swollen stream. But Arya still expected to see the outlaws every time she looked back. She had tried to help them by scratching her name on the trunks of trees when she went in the bushes to make water, but the 4th time she did it, he caught her, and that was the end of that. It doesn't matter, Arya told herself. Thoros will find me in his flames. Only he hadn't. Not yet, anyway. And once they crossed the river... Arya and the Hound spent a few chapters riding the Hound's faithful horse. Wipe your nose and shut your mouth, he told her. Half the time he slept in his saddle now, trusting his stallion to follow whatever rutted farm track or game trail they were on. The horse was a heavy courser, almost as big as a destrier, but faster. Stranger, the Hound called him. Oh, that's good. The warrior, the smith, the father, the mother, the maiden, the crone, and the stranger. The horse isn't really dying. He represents dying because he's named after the Faith of the Seven's aspect of death. And I think this horse makes a pretty good representation of death, because he's a complete asshole to everyone but Sandor. Arya had tried to steal him once, when Clegane was taking a piss against a tree, thinking she could ride off before he could catch her. Stranger had almost bitten her face off. He was gentle as an old gelding with his master, but otherwise he had a temper as black as he was. She had never known a horse so quick to bite or kick. 3 dragons, or you teach that hell horse to walk on water. That was his horse, Stranger, a blasphemous name. We prefer to call him Driftwood. Handsome he may be, but Driftwood was surely whelped in hell. Do you see how the words of the prophecy reflect the prophet's point of view? Melisandre looked at a stag in the flames, and she called it a deer, because she's a priestess, not a hunter. She looked at a horse that represents the stranger, and she only saw a dying horse, because she worships the Red God, not the Seven. Arya and the Hound finally arrived at her uncle's wedding, but the music was terrible, so they decided not to stay for the reception. After the Red Wedding, Arya started having wolf dreams in Nymeria almost every night. That was the best part, the dreaming. She dreamed of wolves most every night, a great pack of wolves, with her at the head. She was bigger than any of them, stronger, swifter, faster. She could outrun horses and outfight lions. When she bared her teeth, even men would run from her. Her belly was never empty long, and her fur kept her warm, even when the wind was blowing cold. And her brothers and sisters were with her, many and more of them, fierce and terrible and hers. They would never leave her. So she stayed with the Hound. They rode every day, never sleeping twice in the same place, avoiding towns and villages and castles as best they could. She is staying well away from villages. The Hound wants to ransom Arya, and at this point his plans are ruined. He was going to sell her back to her family, but her family just got slaughtered, and he's thinking about taking her to Riverrun. And Arya says, "I know where we could go." She still had one brother left. Jon will want me, even if no one else does. He'll call me little sister and muss my hair. It was a long way, though, and she didn't think she could get there by herself. She hadn't even been able to reach Riverrun. We could go to the wall. Sandor's laugh was half a growl.
The little wolf bitch wants to join the Night's Watch, does she?
My brother's on the wall, she said stubbornly.
This thing about racing to Jon for protection at the wall, it keeps coming up in Arya's story, over and over again. Like her warging into her grey direwolf. Arya has grey eyes, a grey sigil, and she wore those grey clothes at Harrenhal. That's quite a lot of recurring greyness, but we'll keep an eye out for more. I like the Nymeria interpretation the best. But you know what we're still missing? Grey as ash. I feel like the greyness needs to involve the ash description, or some kind of fiery event. During a brawl with the Mountains men at the inn at the crossroads, the Hound suffered a gruesome leg wound. He tried to continue on to the coastal town of Saltpans, but the wound festered and Arya left him for dead, leaning against a tree. At Saltpans, Arya bought passage on a ship, but the captain refused to take her to where she really wanted to go.
I am captain here. What is your wish? Be quick, child. We have a tide to catch. I want to go north, to the wall. I can pay. She gave him the purse. The Night's Watch has a castle on the sea. Eastwatch. The captain spilled out the silver onto his palm and frowned. Is this all you have? Of course it isn't all she has. She offers the iron coin that was given to her by Jaqen H'ghar. Give this coin to any man from Braavos, and say these words, Valar Morghulis. And so she said those words.